morning, everybody, and welcome to another class period of Criminology. I hope you're doing great this morning. I don't know if we're going to have people here or not, given some of the changes that have taken place, not just in the class, but in the school in general. We know that we're going live. Live classroom settings, so I know that you're going there. And in an attempt to be cognizant of that, I have in fact made these live streams. They're not mandatory. However, I prefer to have people there simply for the fact that that interaction really helps me with my with the teaching. However, I'm also cognizant that there's going to be conflicts between you being in the classroom here and you being in the classroom at Kendall campus or whatever campus you're on. And therefore, I try to be respectful of that. And since this is an asynchronous class, it's not a problem at all for me to just post a video for an hour video and then you watch it. Now, these are mandatory. You do need to watch these for sure. However, in watching them, it is vital and it's really important that you pay attention all the way through, because there's going to be hints on what to do for your next assignment. There's going to be terminology that you're going to need to know, and I'm not going to post it in the announcement board because these are supposed to be part of the class. But in any case, I'm very excited. I'm going to be grading your papers probably next week. I'll start doing that. But in any case, don't worry about that so much. What's really more important is for you to go back again and watch that video, how to write a great paper. Okay? The other thing that is really important for you to do is for you to go back and watch the video on the Who Am I? Because the Who Am I gives you like the theoretical underpinnings of everything that you need to know when it comes to theory, because it doesn't seem like it yet, but this really is a theoretically driven class. Criminology is all theory. Criminal justice is about practice, and it's about the process of engaging the system when someone engages in wrongdoing. Criminology is the study of patterns of crime and how we explain those patterns of crime. So I see that someone's in here. Why don't you go ahead and say good morning so I know who I'm talking to, since it's just the two of us right now. But in any case, we take a look at it. You do have an assignment due next week, and I know some of you are going to have confusions. Let me speak about the confusions for just a second. If you're on, hey Briannis, if you are on a WhatsApp chat, I strongly suggest that you stop participating in that, because what's happening is that rather than people reading the syllabus or reading the announcements that I'm writing or watching the videos that usually contains most of the answers, instead they're confusing one another on the WhatsApp chat. There's nothing complicated about this class. It's all very structured and laid out. As a matter of fact, I went through the syllabus this morning to take a look at the assignments. There's nothing wrong with the assignments, so I don't know where the confusion is. And I stopped answering all those emails because text messages, simply because of the fact that I was receiving so many of them. You guys, not you, but I was getting stressed out, and my blood pressure was at a level. I was looking at having another stroke. The reason why I'm teaching remote is so I don't get the coronavirus and have a stroke. And so I started taking a look at it, and I'm like, this is ridiculous when I'm answering the same question over and over again, and it's all right there in the syllabus. So I will answer questions, but let them be questions of substance, not questions of, well, when's it due? I'm not going to answer any of that. I'm not going to answer anything that can be found in the syllabus. However, there might be a question about, what do I mean by a news event, right? I don't want everyone doing a paper on George Floyd or on Breonna Taylor. I know those are very important, but there are other crime issues. So next week, for example, you have a news event, right? It's called, the assignment's called Theory Today. And what you do is you're going to take a news event and you're going to use theory to explain the news event. That's it. I mean, it's nothing complicated. It has to do with crime. Then you're going to use a theory to explain that crime. Now, I'm going to give you a list of theories that you're going to have to look up. You have to look them all up, because every situation, right? Every situation has a different explanation. right? So if we're going to explain a crime, you got to at least be familiar with the you have to be familiar with the theories. Those of you who are from SAS, you have access to the main textbook. Those of you who are not have access to this one, and you have access to Ray Sikора's Procedural Justice. They both have theory in them. As a matter of fact, you can find the theory in those books. So we basically have two classes here. One is the SAS group, who has the formal textbook, and there's those of you who have the other textbooks, and you need to have them. But in doing so, I will give you some terminology to look up, and then you apply what you think is best for your paper. Now, go back and watch How to Write a Great Paper, because people say Schwaner is easy. He's easy, and he's an easy class. I don't know if I agree with that, but what I do agree with is you get good grades. And the reason you get good grades is because I'm a sociologist who believes that if you provide the structure, the grade will follow, right? So I have a very structured way that I like for you to do your papers. One, and go look at it, it's in the video. One is you always write an introduction, right? Always write an introduction. And write the term, write it in bold. Introduction, and then you write the introduction. Now, a conceptual introduction is not the same as a descriptive one. I don't want you describing the news event at all, right? Not at all. I don't want you telling me what the news event is. What I want instead is I want you to analyze that event. Now, I will use Breonna Taylor and George Floyd for just a second. All right. So I take a look at this, and what we have is protests over racial discrimination, right? Racial discrimination in criminal justice and policing. Well, discrimination and this idea that there's inequality and that there's this prejudice in the system certainly points to conflict theory, which I'll talk about conflict theory in a little bit. So what you would do if you were going to approach analyzing those particular events is you'd have to make an argument that somehow there is power inequity and that minorities are the disproportionate recipients of violence by the police. You have to make that argument. You can't just say it because you can't just prove it. All you have is the news, and the news may be a distortion. Now, we know that those two cases happen, but that doesn't mean there's a broader pattern. You got to prove that. You can't just use your opinion, right? You can't just use your opinion and say that this is what it is. So here's what you have to do, right? You start with a conceptual introduction. Go watch that video again, How to Write a Great Paper. And essentially, you start the paper like this. You would start it with the name of an author, the year that they wrote it, and then the word argued. So I would do something like this. Marx, 1851, argued. What did he argue? He argued that that within the social system, the institutions favor the wealthy over the poor. Boom, right? Therefore, the criminal justice system is designed to protect the interests of the wealthy at the exploitation of those who are poor and working class. Next sentence, period. Right? They would say that the alienated population in urban areas are most likely to be targeted by the criminal justice system, period. Okay? In this case, there's a common consensus that excessive force is used by the police as representatives of the status quo to maintain control of those who are poor, minority, and working class, period. Now, the next sentence is the killer. This is the one I'm looking for, okay? This is the one I'm looking for in your paper. That, you see, that's 4 sentences. Here's the 5th sentence. Watch that video. I'm very consistent about this. The next sentence is this. This paper is, comma, therefore, comma, designed to analyze. Now, I want you to write that exactly as I just did it. The last sentence of your paragraph, your first paragraph should say, this paper is, comma, therefore designed to analyze what? The relationship between, okay, and here it is, between an independent variable and a dependent variable. An independent variable causes the outcome, all right? So in this case, between social, class, inequality, and what's the outcome? Excessive force, excessive, geez, I have glasses and I still can't see, force against minorities. There it is. You just framed a paper conceptually, right? Now you've got a conceptual framework. You're not describing anything. Now in the next section, which is your background, now you can give the background of the case. Here's what the case looks like, and here's how it went down, okay? Then the next section is you're going to elaborate upon conflict theory and or alienation theory or internal colonization theory, which we're going to talk about later here today. And you elaborate on the theory, okay? And then in the next section, you come up with some data. You got to find some kinds of statistics on excessive force, right? And its distribution. You also need to take a look at how often are the police attacked? Who attacks them, right? Are African Americans more likely to be victims of excessive force, or are white Americans, right? Is it based upon a frequency, or is it based upon a rate? In other words, once you start to dive into the numbers, the story starts to become a little bit different than what the media is projecting. So what you really have to do is ask the question, and this is a conflict perspective, which means the conflict basically means that conflict is built into the system to favor the wealthy over the poor, right? So essentially, here's the question. Why is our attention constantly directed towards street crime and street offenders? Why? Why is it the news continuously focuses on the racial divide? Is there a reason? The Marxists would say that the reason why we focus overwhelmingly, Tiny Rechelita, back again. The reason why we focus on these type of events is to deflect attention away from the wrongdoing committed by the wealthy, right? So as long as we continue to focus on the racial divide, as long as we continue to focus on George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, it diverts our attention away from the wrongdoing that happens at the hands of the wealthy. And as long as we don't look at them and we look over here, it allows the system to continue as it is, right? So a conflict theorist would certainly say that even though these events are real, the overwhelming focus on these events exclusively detracts away from what the wealthy do that's inappropriate, right? Why are we not, if we're worried about the opioid addiction, why are we not attacking the pharmaceutical companies that are controlled by those persons who are wealthy, right? The CEOs and all the decision makers. Why aren't we focusing on their known knowledge that what they're producing is generating a whole lot of death? Why are they not being accountable for the death based upon the distribution of pharmaceuticals, right? Because we know the prescription drugs are the #1 reason why people overdose. It's not cocaine. It's not crack cocaine. It's not crystal meth. So we have all these stories when we do talk about drugs in society. We talk about crack. Why? Because that's what the poor use, right? Crystal meth, that's what the poor use, right? If we take a look at the distribution of opioids and we start to see that it is generated by prescription drugs, then we have to take a different look at how those drugs get into our social system. You see what I mean? So essentially, the way we focus on the news detracts attention away from those who have power and those who have the ability to set the laws and set the policies. That's theory, right? So theory, what does theory do? Theory is used to do 3 things, right? 1, it is used to explain phenomenon. Right? 2, it is designed to understand. Good morning. Oh, hey, Natalie. Nice to see you. It is designed to help us understand phenomenon. And the real important one, the 3rd reason is that it helps us to predict outcomes. For example, if you give me, I was able to predict that Donald Trump was going to win the presidency in 2016. And people would say, how do you know that Donald Trump, and the day before the election, I was in class, I did it publicly. I said, I know Donald Trump's going to win, even though Hillary was way up in all the polls. I said, Hillary can't win. And my students said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, let's take a look at data. Because no one ever looks at data. They always look at opinions, right? And opinions are very misleading because they're grounded in common sense, and common sense is really grounded in media portrayal word of mouth and politics, correct? So here's what I said. I said, look, there's only two forms of data that's accurate. Forget about employment data because there's so many definitional issues that it becomes extremely hard to make any kind of assessment of what the unemployment rate is. Because the unemployment rate is a reflection of what? People who are actively looking for a job for the last 6 months. All right, that's unemployed. Well, what if you gave up? What if you're a discouraged worker? What if you don't even look for a job? What if you work in the underground, where what you do is you make money under the table? Okay, those people don't count as unemployed. They're discouraged workers, right? But they're not unemployed. So the unemployment rate may not tell us anything about crime. Oh, hey, Darlene. Good morning. Hey, Darlene, this is for you just for a second. I'm going to sidetrack for a second. You all, every Monday and Thursday at 7:30, I'm running investment seminars, and you can get the link inside the announcements. I think it is something that you would really like. And Darlene, you said something last week during one of the live streams or something that I was doing that I really appreciated your commentary. So I just want you to know what's going on. I just want you to know what's going on. So here's how I predicted that Donald Trump was going to win. There's only two types of data that's really accurate to look at: homicide data and suicide data. All right. Now, if you give me statistics on homicide and suicide, I have enough theoretical knowledge of how to explain crime that you give me those two numbers, I can make predictions, right? I can predict the future outcomes of criminal behavior. Okay. So how did I do it? I said, okay. In 2008, when the whole economic system crumbled and collapsed, theoretically, economists always say that, well, when there's a breakdown in the economic order, there's an increase in crime, right? That's what they always say. And it makes sense, right? If people are struggling to make it, they're going to rob more, and then there's going to be more homicide because people aren't going to just give you their money and all this kind of stuff. So anyhow, there was a prediction that crime was going to go up. Homicide. And the reason I always talk about homicide, by the way, is because it's the most accurately reported crime that there is, right? If someone gets murdered, it's getting reported to the police. If there's a dead body rotting inside someone's house, the smell is going to make somebody call the police, all right? So I know people say, well, what about people who disappear? What about the ones that get thrown in the Everglades? That gets washed out. It's just called noise, right? Because it's so rare. The ones that are common, we can document, and it gets documented. So even if there's like ambiguity in some of the numbers, it's a lot more accurate than looking at larceny, theft, or burglary, or robbery, or rape. Rape is very, very difficult to assess because of the fact that so much of it goes unreported, right? The dark figure of crime. Dark figure of crime is this. We know how much crime there is, but what we don't know is the dark figure of crime. So when people don't report crime, right, that creates this void of information, and we don't have it. And that's the dark figure, and we got to figure out the dark figure. Me, I just talk about homicide because if it's going up, it tells me something about economics, it tells me something about culture, it tells me something about the education system, all those kind of things. This is why, in Louisville, in Columbus, and in Miami, I was called in by all three cities, not a person, the whole entire city brought me in to design programs to drive down the homicide rate. And right now I'm 3 for 3. In Columbus, we drove down the homicide rate by 40%. In Louisville, Kentucky, in 1998 to 1999, we drove down the homicide rate by 50% in 1 year. And then in Miami, you can look it up, the homicide rate in 2014 was 19.7 per 100,000. And last year, in 2019, it reached its record low. I bet you didn't know that, though, did you? I bet you didn't know that Miami in 2019 hit its record low at 9.5 per 100,000, right? Because the news is always portraying all the bad stuff, when the fact of the matter is the program that we had designed drove it down 50% in a matter of 4 years. Okay? Why? It's because of theory. Right? You take a look at the numbers tell me something. Here's what the numbers told me. So in 2008, we expected that there would be a surge in violent crime, namely homicide. But it didn't go up. It stayed flat. As a matter of fact, it went down by 2015 to the lowest level it had been since the 1950s. Except, and this exception is critical, the only group that saw an increase in homicide after 2008 were African American men between the ages of, 20 and 28. It's the only group. And it wasn't even an explosion. It was a surge of 6%. It went up about 6% between 2008 and 2016. All right? But keep that in mind. All right? Those young African American men between 20 and 28. On the other side of the coin, what we saw is an explosion in suicide after 2008. And why? Because white males between the ages of 45 and 54 who lost everything during the economic debacle of 2008, they were, and I struggled from it too, because average income for the white male went from roughly $100,000 for college educated down to 30. So people were taking horrific pay cuts, 50 and 70%, but they still had the bills, they still had the house, they still had the cars. And what happened was they couldn't get hired back in as middle management, upper management. And you started to see these persons say, oh my God, I'm failing. And they killed themselves. So we saw the rate of suicide among white males 45 to 54, it skyrocketed, and suicide in general went up some, but for that group of people, it went way up, which is really interesting. Because what that means is that the economic and cultural changes that happened in the year 2008 were experienced the exact same for black males between 20 and 28 and white males between 45 and 54. Their response was exactly the same to the same structural changes. Man! So here we are in 2020 looking at these crises as if somehow whites and blacks are different, when the fact is that the response to structural change was exactly the same. But instead of us looking at how people respond to structural change in a similar way, in other words, the use of lethal violence, what we do instead is we vilify groups, and then we distract groups, and we distance groups from one another, and once we distance them, then it's easier to conquer them, right? And that's exactly what's happened. So really what was happening is whites and blacks were responding to the same structural changes, but in different ways, all right? What did that mean? Here's what it meant. When Hillary was running against Donald in 2016, black men were not thriving economically under Barack Obama. That was a misnomer. Their economic situation did not improve at all over those 8 years. But they couldn't vote for Donald Trump, you see, because of the hatred that was being spewed by his far right-wing constituency. So black males in general couldn't vote for Trump because of the rhetoric, but they couldn't vote for Hillary either. And I told my class, I said, watch, black voter turnout is going to be low, especially among men between 20 and 28 years old, right? But on the flip side, all right, here on the flip side, white males who were committing suicide, who were vulnerable to that downturn, they weren't going to vote for Hillary either, because they were responding also to economic changes, right? Remember that diagram? Remember this diagram right here? Where's it? How do I get that camera? Remember this? Right? From the Who Am I video, you got the economic institution, political institution, family institution, education institution, religious institution, media institution, not up here, but criminal justice institution. Those work together, right, to form our opportunity structure. Out of the opportunity structures emerge social networks. From the social networks emerge small groups, and then there you are in interaction, right? There it is. Your response to certain situations is based upon your social location in this system, right? So if you act out violently, it most likely means that you have blocked opportunities to all these institutions, right? But if you violate yourself, what that typically means is that the cultural system has shifted. And that means that the stream, and if you go and use your textbook by Ray Sikora, you'll find the argument. Stream analysis, I need to write that down. Stream analysis makes the argument that there are underlying structures, and those are structures, those institutions are structures that dictate our behavior, right? So white males who are also run over by the shift in the economic system could not vote for Hillary because they've just had 8 years of Barack Obama and their life position didn't get better. It got worse. And then, what was Trump saying? Make America great again. So those white males between that age, 45 and 54, what they do? They came out and voted. They weren't being spotted in the polls because they were rural. Our polls tend to get people from urban areas. So we had two forces at work. Black males were not going to turn out to vote in mass, and white males were going to vote for Trump. And what happened? In Detroit, in Philadelphia, and in Milwaukee, black males did not come out to vote. 10,000 votes fewer in 2016 than in 2008. And those 10,000 votes in Detroit, right, flipped Michigan from Hillary to Trump. And in Philadelphia, it was the exact same thing. Those votes, those missing votes, flipped it. Pennsylvania, which is usually a Democratic state, from Hillary to Trump. Same thing in Wisconsin, I'm sorry. So what happened? What happened? It was all theory-based, right? The numbers told me that here's what's going to happen with the vote. And I was like, man, I can't even believe I was predicting it, given that it was completely counterintuitive to what the polls were saying. But as it turns out, you see, there are structures that exist in our society. And if you understand how the structures work, how the institutions work, you can project and predict what the future is going to look like. This is why I am so adamant about you all becoming thinkers and not lemmings, not followers. This is why I'm so adamant that we have to take a look at transformative education rather than transactional education. Because as long as you are trained to make everything a transaction, where you're trained to basically make your payment and get your credit hours, and if you do that enough times, we hand you a degree, right? That's fine. I mean, it's important to have a degree because it opens doors. But the fact of the matter is, while you're memorizing for multiple choice exams for my thinking, you're trying to get into my head instead of your own head. And guess what? As we move down the road into the future with artificial intelligence and robotics, who controls that? It's the wealthy, correct? Who's going to be displaced? It's going to be us, the working class, the persons who are poor. Take a look at the kiosk at McDonald's. Those things are going to start replacing the employees. You got robots cooking the burgers. You got kiosks out there. You don't need the person at the front window. Next thing you know, do you need insurance agents? No, you just plug it in. Do you even need the police? If you go to China, you'll find that artificial intelligence and robotics and deep learning is actually doing the policing for the people in China. And as a matter of fact, it's driving up the crime rate artificially. Right? So we have the technology to make all the changes, and it will happen. Because technology, look, these companies do not create this technology so that they can go broke. They create the technology so that they can increase profits. And you can't increase profits if you don't expand your markets. So what are they going to do? They're going to continue to try to sell into the marketplace artificial intelligence, deep learning, security, right? As long as you're fearful of terrorist attack and you're fearful of the police attack or whatever attacks you're afraid of, as long as we generate a fearful public, one that is willing to give up their privacy for safety and protection, you're going to have a magical thing happen. And what's that? You're going to be controlled, right? Because they're not training you to think for yourself. And here's the other part. If you're just following along with what the market's going to do, that is, the labor force, you're a goner. In 10, 20 years, these technologies will replace you. By the way, they're going to replace me because Siri is smarter than I am. I'm pretty good, but Siri, she got a artificial intelligence in her mind, and she can look things up instantaneously and get it right. So I started looking about 3-4 years ago. I said, okay, think as if you're wealthy, Sean. How would you be displaced in this marketplace? I said, well, you can create a robot. They did it at Georgia Tech. They had a TA that was a robot, and the students didn't know it was a robot. Came in, answered the questions, and taught the class, and it was a recitation class. You have the main lecture hall with the professor, then you have recitation. This robot taught the class, right? They didn't even know. And it was artificial intelligence. So I'm sitting here saying, okay, Siri's smarter than me, Alexa's smarter than I am. They can create robots that are both prettier and smarter than I am. I said, you know what? It is very possible that in the next 5-10 years, I will be displaced by technology. And look what's happening now, right, with this remote thing. With the remote, it is entirely possible that we can create, artificial intelligence with voice recognition, etc., that you can replace your professors. And you do so, and guess what? You get the same education, essentially the same education. And then, well, I got other theories on that. I'll just freeze it there for a second. But I said, what would displace me? And I started investing in the very thing that would end my career. And as it turned out, I made a fortune, right? I made a lot of money by investing in NVIDIA, which is, for artificial intelligence data storage. Then I turned around and I'm making a fortune now with a car company called NIO. First completely level 5 self-driving autonomous car. It has AI in it. It has it's an electric vehicle car. It's in China, and the Chinese are pushing that there won't be any more fossil fuel used by the year 2030. And I'm sitting here saying, this company is fantastic. It's the #1 quality EV in the world. So I said, well, let me go. No one's heard of it. So I invested in it. I'm up 500% since March in this company. Why? Because I'm looking at the institutions. I look at the trends. And it's not your fault. The majority of us have not been taught to look at the trends. Majority of us have not been taught to take a look at that economic institution, that political institution, and use that as a sounding board to predict what the future might look like. All right? Without that ability to predict, guess what? You're sitting there on the cusp of getting run over by a system that you didn't create. Why? Because the institutions are greater than us as an individual. So here's what you have to do. I don't mean to be preachy, people. I don't. But I care for you. I didn't care for all those text messages that were driving up my blood pressure, but I do care for you. And here's really what my ambition is. This is my life mission at this point in time. It's not even teaching criminology, which I'm going to get to here in a minute. But really, what is most important is that you become entrepreneurial. You have to take a look at what are these trends that are coming down the road, right? What are your dreams and visions? What are your aspirations? What skills do you have? And how can you put yourself into those institutions creatively and in a clever way? Even if you work for somebody else, you want to be one of the top 5%. You got to think for yourself, right? Your boss asks you a question. Don't just give them a freaking answer. Say, you know what, ma'am or sir, can I have a little bit of time to consider your question? Then you go out, you recapitulate what the question is, you develop a theory of what is underlying the question, go find some data, and then provide an analysis and draw some conclusions. This is how you do in a paper. Introduction, background, theory, data, analysis, conclusion, right? You do that in your papers for the rest of your college career. I guarantee you in classes that, like the social sciences, you're going to get A's in every single one of the classes. Introduction, write the word introduction in your paper. Write the word background in your paper. Write the word theory, write the word data, write the word analysis, and write down conclusion. You do that. Now you're separating yourself from the pack. Now you're becoming one of the top 5%ers. How is it possible that I wrote an entire book in 40 days, edited the whole thing completed? It's because I have that same exact structure. The follow-up, right? I put the book on the market last Monday. Today is 8 days later. I've written 65 or 70 pages to the follow-up book. It's going to be done by the middle of October, at least by Halloween. So I will have written, 4 books, right, since June. Since June, I've written 4 books. Why? Because that structure, man, that structure will take you to where you want to go. But what's more important, it's not what the structure does. It makes you think in a structured way. And when you start thinking for yourself, and when you start owning your ideas instead of having other people own you, then you can stand up on your own. Now, here's the problem. And this is what you got to watch out for. Once you become the person that's in control of your thoughts, you become a threat. And you're going to find yourself isolated. They say ignorance is bliss. There's a reason for that. Because if you can't see what's happening in front of you, it's very easy to be accepting of what's happening. But once you start to see how those institutions work, right, and how you're a contextual being, right? And that if you think for yourself, you can come up with different solutions to questions that you hadn't even imagined before. Now all of a sudden you become one of the top 5%ers, whether it's in a workplace or whether it's independently. But I swear to you, please people, oh my gosh, you have to do this. And the other thing you have to do, 3 things, right? Start thinking in terms of trends, right? Use the institutions. What are those institutions telling us about the future? Bam. Get to know that. Become very good at that. All right. Second thing is become entrepreneurial. Try to think of a way to have your own business. That's what you got to think about. Your own business. Because by 2040, 30 to 40% of Americans will have to be self-employed. They'll have to have their own business. Three. Invest. You got to let your money grow. You can't be a debtor, all right? Because if you're saving negative 2% every month, you're gonna get crushed. So what you need to do is you need to target not saving, but investing 5 to 10% of everything. You got to pay yourself first because no one's going to do it. And you can get growth between 12% is easy to get, right? This year I'm up, I don't know, 32%. 2 years ago I was up 125%. Last year I was way down, and guess what? I used it as a discount to buy more. That's why I'm up so far this year. That's why I'm up 400% since March. It's because I kept buying even though I was losing money. And then next thing you know, the momentum takes me up. And the fourth thing you've got to do, you got to do this, is, you remember, where is it? You see this? Where is it? See this part right here, the small groups, the people you surround yourself with? You've got to surround yourself with people who lift you up. You got to surround yourself with a team. Some people, like Bob Proctor calls it, a mastermind. You have to have people that match the way you think, the way you believe, and they have to be driven. They have to be ambitious, because there's too many folks out there who are very complacent and who are very comfortable in their mediocrity. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. However, if you're trying to go somewhere, if you're trying to take control of your life, those are the steps you got to take. You have to take those steps. You got to think for yourself. You got to be entrepreneurial. You got to invest, because when you get my age, no one's going to be out there taking care of you as far as we know. Social Security may be gone. It may not be gone. Pensions may or may not be gone, but you got to predict that they will be gone. And if they are, who's going to take care of you? You. You're going to have to take care of you. And the last thing you have to do is you have to build your team. All right? So that's all because I'm making predictions based upon the trends. And the trends are not wrong, right? Because they are structural events. They are patterns that take place. And history says the same thing. So we are in a major transformation. You are in the greatest transformation in human history. And according to Malcolm Gladwell, when you have major transformation like that, the wealthiest people to ever live on the planet, ever, were those who, when industrialization took place and you had the Industrial Revolution, those people who owned the oil industry, those who owned railroads, were the ones who became the wealthiest people in human history. Even on a dollar basis, over time, wealthier than Jeffrey Bezos and Bill Gates and all those guys. You know, you take somebody like Rockefeller, or what's the guy from Standard Oil? Can't think of his name right offhand. But the guy from Standard Oil, he'd be worth $400 billion now, right? The Rockefellers, and then I can't think of the name. Cornelius Vanderbilt, those guys, they'd all be worth $200 billion because they're on the cutting edge. You're on the cutting edge. If you put yourself into it correctly, you can thrive. You can be an outlier, which is what Malcolm Gladwell calls them. Somebody that's out of the ordinary in a positive way, right? And that's all I'm saying. Be one of the top 5%ers, and you'll never have to worry about anything again. Oh, jeez. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, man. I'm going into all this stuff. Let me see a show of hands. Does this make sense? There's only 3 of us together. Does this make sense before I move into the next level? You understand what I'm saying about institutions working together to create the fabric and the structure that you live by? Does that make sense? Let me see. Yes or no? Yes or no? All right, Natalie. Thank you. It's so weird that, you know, this stuff is actually going on live while we're talking. All right. Okay. Let me... Who else is out there? Tiny Rachelita, are you out there? I love saying that. All right. Okay, I'll say, well, at least Natalie's with me. Okay. Here's some theories that I want you to look up. Right? There are 3 major, what do you call them? Grand theories. Okay? There are 3 grand theories. And you're going to look all these up. All right? Grand theories are just major paradigms, major perspectives. All right? There are 3. The first one is functionalism. All right? Natalie, that is, hey, you can look these up anyhow. That makes me even more proud. The fact that you're here, you're not even in the class. Which class are you in? Functionalism, which class are you in? Which is Durkheim. Then the other class is, or the other theory is conflict theory. Bang. And the other one, which is Karl Marx. Right. Then the other one is oh, okay. Oh, well, there's going to be some similarity. Well, there'll be a lot of similarities with the ISS class today. But since you're here, hold on a second. Symbolic Interactionism. And this is a side note. Those of you in the criminology class, do not listen to what I'm about to tell Natalie. All right? So, Natalie, I want you to look up those same theories: conflict theory, symbolic interactionism, and functionalism. But there's 3 others that I want you to look up. I'm not going to write it down because it'll confuse people. Natalie, I hope you have a pen and paper handy. I want you to look up, underneath functionalism, I want you to look up modernization theory. Modernization theory. Then I want you to look up, underneath conflict, I want you to look at dependency theory. All right? And then the other theory that I want you to look up is called world systems theory. All right? So those are really the 3 that you're going to be looking at. Now, when you do your book analysis, which is based upon autobiography, then you got to get an autobiography. Then you're going to use one of those 5 or 6 theories to explain as best you can the autobiography. All right. So that's just for you, Natalie, and that means you don't have to show up for the live stream at the next time period, because everything is going to be similar. The thinking is the same, because theory is theory. It doesn't matter what class it is. And conflict theory is conflict theory. It doesn't matter if it's social environment or if it's criminology. It's all the same, right? But in any case, theory is theory, and what we're going to cover then in ISS is the same as what we're covering now. It's just a different twist. Okay, so you're good. Thanks for showing up. I appreciate that. Now, for those of you who are in my criminology class, here are functionalist theories that I want you to look up. All right, there is strain theory, which is anomie. All right, let me move my notes here. Strain theory, anomie, and that is by Merton. I hope you're getting this, because I'm not putting it in the announcements. You all better watch this video when I post it in about an hour. Okay, the next one is social disorganization theory, right, which is Shaw, not Sean, and McKay. All right. The next one is social control theory. And you're going to see that these are all interrelated. They're vastly different, but they're interrelated. They're all under the functionalist umbrella, which you look up functionalism. Social control theory with Hershey, and my advisor, Simon Dinitz. He was a legend. He was a pioneer in the field. Then you have differential association theory, and that is with, some would regard the king, Edwin Sutherland. All right. So those are your functionalist theories in criminology. In ISS, your functionalist theory is dependency theory. Right? No, sorry, modernization theory. All right. Now, under the conflict paradigm with Marx, conflict theories, we have some alienation theory. You got to look it up. There is, oh, okay, I put that down. Internal, this is my favorite. I'm one of the experts in this, colonization theory, which actually explains the George Floyd situation. When you have urban areas that essentially are hotspots or places that have are colonies, where most of their independence is based upon outside companies, outside landlords pulling out resources from there but not putting them back in, you have a colonized type of situation. And within a colonized situation, what you have, crime is within race, right? So that those persons who create the condition are not culpable for the behavior. And those persons who live in the colonies, they attack persons in the colonies and therefore create a situation where the violence runs rampant. Therefore, for example, the Crips and the Bloods. Crips and the Bloods are structurally the exact same people, right? But they have come to define themselves as the enemy. Why? Because they're in a colony. Okay, so once you create a colony like Los Angeles or Chicago based upon neighborhood, then all of a sudden you're going to have this situation where those who control those neighborhoods aren't even culpable. They're not even the ones to blame for what takes place. All right. So the other theory that is important for you to look up is labeling theory. Right. And there's a bunch of people. We'll just say I don't know, Becker. We'll go with Becker. Okay. Now, under symbolic interaction, and you all are looking these up before you do your book review for, before you do your news event for next week. Symbolic Interactionism. And that's with Bloomer, Herbert Bloomer. All right. And some of the theories that fall underneath that are dramaturgy, which is by my guy Goffman. I love that guy. When I start talking about people wearing a mask and they hide behind the mask, that's Goffman. When I say that we have front stage behavior, backstage behavior, we try to protect our authentic self by creating a virtual self, that's Erving Goffman. Everything is a drama. Everything is a play. Everything is a role relationship with other people. That's him. That's dramaturgy. He is a part of the phenomenology paradigm, which is also Goffman, Garfinkel. I'll just put down Garfinkel so you have somebody. But phenomenology, Schutz is a big one. All right, so you got these guys. And see, I'm doing it off the top of my head. Ethnomethodology. Ethnomethodology is another perspective. Okay, so those are symbolic interactionist perspectives. Now, some of these perspectives that are theoretically based or concepts don't cleanly fall underneath any of these particular theories. All right, so they're interrelated. These are called the chronicity theories, which are really the overlap between functionalism and symbolic interactionism. Chronicity theories. The most important one is you got to look up the chronic offender. And then the name that you want to look up is Wolfgang. That's my guy. Man, this by the way, chronicity is the reason why I can predict anything in any city, because I understand how this idea of chronic offender, right? You're going to read up on it, but in a future lecture, I'm going to go really into depth with chronicity and chronic offenders, because in my opinion, that is perhaps the most important overall concept. It's part of career criminal research, right? Career criminal research. Look that up, because that's where the chronic offenders come from. Then you have, tied to the chronic offenders, what is called the age crime curve. Look it up. Then you have maturational reform. What is that? Look, this is the key. These are the keys to understanding crime in general. Maturational reform. And then the other one that I want you to look up would be, here, this is a theory. There's routine activity theory. And that's Felsen and Cohen. Pretty good, right off the top of my head. Felsen and Cohen. And then look up stream analysis, which you have with Sikora, Schwaner. I have stuff on there. And then, what's his name? Corzine Huff. Those are the names, baby. Those are the names. Those are the ones that are going to get you to the point that you will understand criminology. Now, there's a bunch of other theories, but these are the core ones. So I do expect you to look these up over the next week, and to also pick the one that you think is best, or a couple of them, to apply to whatever it is, whatever news event that you choose, because all of them play a role. All of them play a role. All right. So I'm going to have you look those up. I'm not going to explain them right now, but I'll give you just a very general overview of the three major paradigms. Right. Conflict theory. Conflict theory basically means that there's social class inequality, and that inequality favors the wealthy over the poor. Okay, so when the wealthy favor over the poor, the whole entire criminal justice system is designed to focus on the wrongdoing committed by the poor and the working class. Right? So therefore, white-collar crime, which Sutherland wrote about, white-collar crime does not receive the same kind of attention or the same kind of punishment as does street crime. So our criminal justice system is specifically designed to prevent and to not just prevent, but to control those who are poor, street criminals. All right. So conflict theory is just basically saying that social class inequality is the root of all conflict within society. The difference between those who have wealth and those who do not, that is, those who are bourgeois. Oh God. Let's see how you spell this. Bourgeoisie. No, I didn't spell it right. The bourgeoisie are favored, they're the ones who are wealthy, over the proletariat. And the proletariats, those are the ones who sell their labor to the bourgeoisie. So therefore, when you sell your labor to the bourgeoisie, you're always going to get paid less than what your value is. And as long as you get paid less than what your value is, you're always restricted to the decisions made by those who are wealthy. You always have to do what they say, because if you don't, then you're going to find yourself impoverished. And in an attempt not to be impoverished, you have to follow what, quote unquote, the man says, right? So therefore, all proletariats, by the way, even if you make over $100,000 a year, you're a proletariat because you're still working for others. That's why it is so important, according to Marx, that we all have our own craft, because by having our own craft, we break that cycle of being dependent upon those who have the power. And by the way, when you have control over your own life, when you have your own company, when you have your own business, your own thing, here's what that means. By doing so, you prevent the experience of alienation. Alienation is this idea that we are separated from our work. We're not creatively tied to it. We don't know who the recipient is of our labor, right? Because when we produce, typically we produce for an anonymous person far on the other end. And then once you feel like you don't control your labor any longer, you experience a sense of alienation, right? If you get cut out of that system, right, you feel alienated from work, you feel alienated from self, you feel alienated from nature. And when all of those alienations take place, the odds of a group of people exploding violently increase. The reason why the protests have turned violent is not because these people are somehow inherently or biologically violent, it's because that sense of alienation is so strong, and those persons who are alienated as a category feel that anger, right? That anger being separated out from the society in which they live, alienation to society. And what happens, they come up with a common alienated voice, and that alienated voice, alienation, is always tied to anger and hopelessness. You tie those two things together, and you take some police officers who walk into an apartment and they shoot 28 times and they hit Breonna Taylor 7 times, well, people say that could have been me. It could have been me, because they searched, the wrong situation. And so now all of a sudden people say, that could have been me. That could have been me. And then they have all these examples, and that alienation surges to the top. And this guy named Spitzer, he's a conflict theorist. He said that there's two types of people out in society. There's social junk and social dynamite. They're alienated groups. Social junk are, they're your druggies. They're the persons that are homeless. They're the ones that really don't cause a lot of a threat. They're just kind of like throwaways. However, they're regarded as deviant. Social dynamite's different, because this alienated group of people will actively try to change the system. And what you're seeing with the protests around the country is social dynamite. So when Donald Trump says we're coming in with the National Guard, we're going to engage in law and order, he's just using the right theory to engage and control the social dynamite. Because if the social dynamite is designed to destroy the fabric as part of alienation and protest, then what's going to happen is you have to respond with a violent methodology. It's all theoretical. I'm not saying Trump's right or wrong. I'm just saying that when you have a situation that emerges, there's theories to explain what's really taking place. And that's really what's taking place, right? But that's a conflict theory, okay? The functionalist theory basically says that all of these institutions, right, all these institutions up top, they work together to promote stability within society. Because we all really do want stability, right? We want predictability. We want to know that if I go to the store, that my dollar is worth the same as it was last week, so I can buy what I need to buy, okay? We want stability. We want to know that when we walk out onto the street and we take a walk that we're not going to be jumped, we're not going to be mugged, we're not going to be shot and robbed. That's stability, right? We want to know that when I wake up tomorrow morning, I'm going to have a job waiting for me. That way I can live at peace. So the functionalists say that the institutions work together to promote stability and equilibrium within society. But when there's breakdown, when there's social breakdown, that social breakdown creates anomie, which is, oops, I don't need that, anomie, which is a sense of normlessness in society. And when there's a sense of normlessness, people will adapt, right? According to Merton, they will adapt in one of 5 ways. Some become very conformist, right? Others will become innovators. They'll find a way to get around the system, even if it's crime. Then there are people who who are ritualists. So instead of making change, they follow rules and they forget what the purpose of the rules were. So, like, for example, you at Miami-Dade College, even though you have the talent to go to school, if you don't have your financial aid papers in place, the ritualist on the other side of the wall is going to say you can't come in. I don't care how smart you are, or, how driven you are. If you don't have the documents, well, they forgot what the purpose of education is. And the purpose of education is for people who have a desire to get an education can get an education. But the ritualist says, no, you got to follow the rules. The outcome's unimportant. It's the rules that are important. That's the ritualist. They drive you crazy. Then there's the retreatists. The retreatists are the group of people who essentially retreat. Drug addicts, homeless, or what have you. Those who disappear from the system are retreatists. Then the final one, which you're seeing with the protests, is an adaptation called rebellion. Okay, so essentially, when you have anomie in the system, when there's structural strain, it's either anomie theory or you could say structural strain. That is where the institutions are strained, right? The economic institution now is strained crazy. That's what the stimulus check is emerging from, okay? With the unemployment, with 40 million people unemployed, there's a lot of strain in the system. And that strain in the system is leading to what? It's leading to a lot of suicides, and it's starting to lead to an upsurge in crime. So what's going to happen is that the institutions are going to work together to try to eliminate that anomie, that normlessness, and create a sense of norms again, so that there's stability, okay? So that's basically how that works. Symbolic interactionism, it basically is exactly what it says, is that on the micro level, that is in interaction, symbolic interaction, we interact based upon symbols, which is basically language, right? We all have a language that we use to construct something that is real. There's nothing real until we come and we negotiate. When we negotiate the definition of meaning, that's how things come to be real. All of your confusion with the remote learning is essentially because of the fact that we didn't have a symbolic system, a symbol system to make sense of it. We had virtual and we had live, but remote is a different kind of definition. So the confusion and my putting out announcements and you're saying, I don't know what he's saying, all these things really is us trying to figure out the symboling system that's going to work for all of us, right? Phenomenology is essentially over time, over our life, through all the phenomenon that we experience, we learn to define the symbols that shape our life. Hold on a second. What is this? Why do I have the fingerprint? All right. So essentially, we are a symboling system, and phenomenology says all those experiences that happen in our lifetime shape our identity, shape who we are. Okay. Ethnomethodologists, which I love saying that word, ethnomethodologists basically say we learn over time how to construct categories, and we treat people in accordance to the category that they occupy. Right? So when we create the category junk, then we treat the homeless as if they're junk. Or we treat the opioid addict or the heroin addict as if they're junk, right? The person who is begging from you, they're junk. That's a category. We forget that they're people and somehow they ended up in that destination, right? So we create these categories. If you go to a classroom and you think that everybody in the classroom is a street gang member and you create that category, you're not going to come back. The category may be right, it may be wrong, but we create these categories so that we can try to predict their behavior. That's ethnomethodology. Okay? So essentially all of life is based upon category. And they essentially say that within categories we have a common sense. It doesn't exist, it's constructed. And once it's socially constructed, then what we do is essentially act as if it's real. Okay? And some of that, like identity self theory or looking glass self, is this idea that we act in accordance to how we imagine other people think we are. So when I'm a professor, I imagine that you think I'm a professor, and when I walk into the room, I act like a professor. That's a looking glass self, right? However, it can be negative too. If I think that you perceive me to be a deviant and a threat to society, then if I become a deviant or a threat to society and I act that way, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what you're seeing with the protests, again, is that you're seeing people who are defined as a threat, right? They see the threat, then some of them respond in a threatening way. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not everybody, but for those persons who do. Why? Because they're looking glass self. I imagine how you think of me, and based upon that imagination is how I define who I am. All right? And then it's the same with relationships, it's the same with whatever. If you think the person who receives your amorous attentions loves you, and you act as if they love you, and then in fact they fall in love with you, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So in other words, all these theories have a different methodology to explain the phenomenon. Your job is to look these theories up, and when you go find your news event, whatever that news event is, you're going to apply that theory to it. And again, you want to write an introduction, you want to write a background, you want to write, and all this is in that video, and then you want to write your theory, collect data, analysis, and conclusion. You structure your thoughts like that, and it's a beautiful thing, because once you learn how to structure your thoughts for these papers, then you learn how to structure your thought for speeches, right? I haven't needed notes in 20 years, and the reason is because I have the exact same structure in my head. I introduce whatever it is I'm going to talk to, I give you some background, then I throw theory in there, I throw some numbers in there, then I do an analysis, and I draw conclusions. I don't need notes to do that because it's all just laid out like that. When you go to do your resume, same thing, right? Go to do your cover letter, same thing. When you go to date somebody, it's the same thing, right? It's all the same thing. That's why mastering this is so important. When you do an interview with someone, it's the same thing. You introduce your idea, give a little background on what their idea is, then you go ahead and say, here's the theory of why this works, provide a little bit of data, boom, now you have an analysis. Boom, 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 boom. You got the job, right? So, in other words, follow the steps, watch the announcement board, do your best, do not text me any questions that are in the syllabus or the announcements. However, if you do have an urgent question, and I'm glad to get the urgent question. I don't mind getting the legitimate ones. Call me on my regular phone, 2447. What is my number? 7801. Call me here or text me first, because I'm not even going to use the other one. There's so many. The other one's just been destroyed. There's 2,000 messages, and I just said, you know what? So if it's not in the syllabus, if it's not in an announcement, go ahead and ask the question. All right? Get off the WhatsApp, because WhatsApp is destroying you. You're all confused, and you start. It's like, okay. When I was in college, I never studied with somebody else. Never. Because here you're studying with someone who's not an expert in the area. And so they're going to tell you what their interpretation is of these different concepts, and you don't even know if you can trust what they're saying. And here's what else happens. When you're studying for the test, you're studying using your mind, the way you frame and the way you think through material. Now all of a sudden someone else tells you how they think about it or what they think about it, and you change. And then you go to answer that multiple choice question, you hear their voice and not your voice. Next thing you know, boom, you got it wrong. So here's how you get it. A's are easy, man. Come on. I don't care what the class is. You always read before you go to class. You go to class and you take notes. Then you compare what's in the book with what's in your notes from class, and you know whatever's in both is going to be on the test. That's 75% of your exam. Okay? So you read beforehand, you take notes, and then you compare. And you do that every day. And next thing you know, The night before the exam, you only have to study it one time. You go through the book one time, you go through your notes one time, and you study 1 hour before you go to bed, because your brain doesn't turn off when you sleep. It processes information. You wake up the next day, you're fresh, you're awake, you're not stressed out. You haven't had to, cram for the test. And guess what? Your scores are going to improve. It's the same with life. The best way to be one of the top 5% is that every single day you got to show up. Every day. You do a little bit more towards your dream, and if you continue to do that enough times, something miraculous is going to happen, and that is you're going to attain your dream. Make sure you can see the dream. Make sure you can see yourself in the dream. Well, are there any questions about anything before I go ahead and sign off here? I know it's hard to watch these presentations. I wish it was live, because I'm funnier when I'm in real life, because I can play off, I can make, I give you all nicknames and stuff like that. Like Tiny Rachelita, she'd be done. I'd be all over her in class. Tiny Rachelita, right? Other questions? You're welcome, Natalie. Thank you so much. I do appreciate that. Remember, on Mondays and Thursdays at 7:30 p.m., we're doing the investment seminars, because I do want you all to be in control of your life. I find that to be really important. But it's 20-minute sessions, and there's 6 of them, right? You come in, you bring your family, bring your friends, bring anybody and everybody you can, because my partner and I, we want to make sure that everyone has access to this knowledge. All right. Awesome, Natalie. Well, I guess there's no questions. Natalie did a lot of participating. She's not even in our class, so Natalie, you're excused from the ISS presentation, because it's going to be very similar, right? And the only difference is that you have to do a book analysis, whereas they have to do an event analysis. But other than that, hey everybody, I want to just tell you that keep watching the announcement board. I will be guiding you through. I will really start grading next week, and in the following week you'll start getting a lot more of your grades, because the papers are all over the place. I mean, there's like 4 or 5 different, I don't even know if some of you even found my Yahoo email ad. How'd you do that? But I'm finding stuff all over the place, so it's going to take me time to get it all organized, but I will get it done. For now, be great, enjoy your dream, work hard, and I will see you next time. All right, see you in 2 weeks.